Hello everyone there, and we're just going to wait for a few more people to log in there. Ironic that the hailstones have just started to fall this second here in sunny Coxo. Maybe not so sunny at the moment. So very appropriate that today is a topic that we're going to be talking about the injuries in winter for the runners. So the Winter Running Injury Prevention Seminar. We'll just wait till a few more of you logged on there. Just a couple of people coming in now. So the weather's certainly turned here in the northeast this afternoon, that's for sure. Thanks to those who did message some questions. I've tried to wrap them up all in a section at the end, but we should be able to cover most of them as we go along there. So we'll certainly try and cover as much as we can of the questions that people have put in about the injuries that we see in winter, in runners more commonly, and obviously how to prevent them, which is the most important thing. So what I might do, just as a few people are logging in there, obviously introduce myself. My name's Neil Sleeman, I'm a physiotherapist, and our company here is Platinum Physiotherapy in Coxo in the northeast of England. Runners is something that we specialise in. We see a lot of runners on a weekly basis, and this seminar is something that a few people have wanted just to ask about what happens as the seasons change, obviously with injuries in runners. So a little bit of a summary about what we'll talk about today. If you've got any questions as we go along, just pop them in the comments and I'll keep an eye on the comments box there and we can add them to what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about the seasonal injury concept. Does it exist? I'm going to talk about it. Do we see different things at different times of the year regarding injuries in runners, particularly in this part of the world? The impact of COVID this year on the running injury. So not COVID itself, but the running habits of people may have changed due to COVID, and that's something you can have a think about yourself, whether that's relevant to you. The types of injuries we've seen this year, and we're going to compare the summer and the winter, so perhaps April and May versus November and December, what we've seen already and what we're seeing now. Then we go into some tips for before running, for after running, things that you can do already to help to prevent injuries this winter, which is a very important winter, obviously with all the restrictions changing so regularly. We want to stay injury-free and we want to be running to keep our physical and mental health going. So that's important. A couple of tips to make sure you can do that. The ideal frequency is a question that's come up from a few of you. We'll talk about that. There is no right answer. We'll talk about the frequency. And then some examples of exercises that you can do to prevent yourself from being injured this winter and then going forward as a runner, and we'll have time for some questions there. So we're going to try and float through these points quite quickly so we can get to the exercises and the suggestions that hopefully a lot of you can try. You can practice at home now during the video when we get there, or you can watch this later on and do them at a later date there. So the seasonal injuries, does it exist? As a physio of 20 years, I would say yes. We always see a pattern, particularly in countries with definite seasons, about the types of injuries we see. And that, there's lots of reasons why. It could be the frequency of the running. It could be the distance that people are running. It could be the speed that people are running. The terrain will definitely be a big one. Are we doing more road? Are we doing more off-road? Is the darkness or the light a factor? All of these things are reasons that seasonal injuries could come into play as a runner. If we talk about the time of day, do you normally run in the morning, the daytime, the evening? It's been different this year during COVID with people working from home, so that could be a big factor, that people could be running at different times of the day, and there's no better or worse. There's different injury risks with different times of the day. That's important. Are we using a head torch for the first time, or are we doing less head torch running this winter? That could be a factor. That dictates certain injuries with neck and shoulder and things like that. All of these are relevant. So who's noticed a change in their running style as it got to winter? Is it a shorter stride, a longer stride? All of these can influence the injury risk as the seasons change. The impact of COVID, the increase in frequency has generally been higher for runners this year, particularly in the UK with the various lockdowns and restrictions, and therefore we have seen an increase in overuse running injuries this year across the board from March and to now. Most people are running more, and therefore the injuries we're seeing could be more from that overuse injury world. So COVID's had an impact, certainly in the summer, created many people doing a lot more running, and now the weaknesses that they have always had are coming to light, and people are getting certain injuries from these weaknesses. Quite simple, if that's your strength regime on a weekly basis and that's your running, there might have been a little gap in the past, but if your running increases and your strength stays the same, then the relative increase will be bigger. Therefore, you're more susceptible for certain types of injuries. Throw in the complexities of not being able to swim and do other things in the gyms where people may have done strength work, and the gap will continue to rise. So the types of injuries, we talk about the summer, April, May, June, July. Lots of overuse injuries from people running more. A lot of these ones will be very well known to you: the Achilles tendonitis, the plantar fasciitis, the hamstring tightness injuries, and that's primarily because the run to strength ratio had changed from a normal year where people were doing lots of other things, working from home and running more often during the work day was a massive factor with what we saw. So that was a huge part of it, that we saw that running strength ratio increase. There might have been 3 runs and 0 strength before, and now it might be 5 runs and 0 strength, or it might have been 2 runs and 3 gyms a week previously, and now it's 5 runs and no gyms because the gyms are shut. That's all a strength to running type ratio. So that's the type of injuries we saw in the summer, and we're still seeing some of them, but much more in the summer. If we go to now, October, November, December, the terrain and everything changes, the light, the time of day, the fading light at the end of the day. We see a lot of the twisting injuries. So things that are just maybe can't be relying on the light as well. Heavier ground, harder to run in the surfaces that we're running in. So we see ankle ligament strains, knee ligament, knee cartilage, or meniscus as we call it, injuries. Some hamstring strains will often go up when the heavier ground comes in, groin strains, more to the heavier element of the running a lot of you are doing now. Different injuries, but still very avoidable with similar strategies, but you have to identify them in a different way. Just because you're used to running a lot more this year in the summer does not mean that you will run better in the winter, in the cold, in the dark, and if it's raining, obviously the wet comes into play. So there's 2 different runs in the summer and the winter that people need to be aware of, and less experienced runners won't see that change as much as the more experienced runner, particularly cross-country type running, terrain, off-road running. So we talk about the tips before running. Why do we do this? Well, obviously we've all heard about warming up, but warming up's different in the context of 2020. You know, we want to make sure that body is not going to get injured, so that the warming up has a role. A dynamic warm-up is important. We just don't do static stretches anymore. The days of just standing outside your front door, doing a couple of quad stretches and a couple of calf stretches, we don't tend to do that. We do more dynamic warm-ups, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Walking lunges, walking on your toes, some knee lifts, leg swings, things that you might see people do in the elite sport when you watch them on television. That's what a dynamic warm-up will look like. So you don't just do static stretches, but at the same time, you don't just open the front door and away you go to a fast 2 or 3 miler. Increase in injury, obviously risk would be there. That's really important. Get the blood flowing, get the muscles moving, get the muscle control, and there's a word called proprioception that we're going to talk about later on that's very relevant to winter. Proprioception, your ability to know where your body is in space to avoid injury. If you do a proprioception exercise before you go out for that run, you'll certainly reduce the chance of an injury related to that problem. So, if we talk about tips after running, we come back in, or maybe we're at the front door, and stretching is what runners have traditionally done. If you're out and about, and parkrun pre-COVID with 400 people, you're going to see a lot of people stretching, and I'm okay with that as an experienced physio. But COVID, a lot of people aren't running in groups. They're heading from home back to home. Therefore, the usefulness of stretching is just starting to not be as useful. A lot of the studies have correctly said that stretching probably has not reduced the risk of injury as much as we would like to believe. Certainly before activity, stretching has not been proven to work, and I agree with that. The dynamic warm-up is better. Coming back into the house, if you're doing a generalized muscle stretch, it won't be as effective as targeting specific points in a muscle, and that's where a lot more of the foam rolling is now done, because you can get to those deep knots straight away. So after the run, at the front door, again, doing that generalized quad stretch, you'll loosen off the muscle as a whole, but if one leg is tighter than the other, and it has a particular knot, then you might be best to be on that foam roller, and you'll just see it slightly out of view, where I'm going to be rolling up and down to find that deep knot. This year, it's easier to be foam rolling because most people are starting and ending at their house, particularly if they're working from home. So after runs, we're moving away from stretching, more and more towards foam rolling because it's much more effective and it can be used on all muscles. So it's very important. Get to the spot of the tightness ready for your next run, and if you do that after your run rather than waiting to the next day, you'll have a much better result for your next run. So your preparation for your next run happens after the run that you've just finished. And that's why stretching this year, not so important with so many people running from home. You're onto the knots using the roller, you get a much better result. Nutritionally, obviously hydration, food, those things are very important after a run. We don't want to dismiss that. In terms of injury prevention, your performance might be affected by your nutrition. Therefore, it makes sense to get that right. Hydrate correctly, eat correctly before or after the run, depending on what you normally find works best for you. And that means that your next run will be much better. Now, the tips between the runs, this is really important. What do we do? A lot of people say, just rest between runs. Well, no, active recovery is what we use. We don't use rest. The only things we're resting are the things we're sending to hospital for x-rays and whatnot. That's what true rest looks like. Those people that saw the seminar the other week that we did, Accelerated Recovery, have a look at it if you didn't watch it. It explains why we don't use rest, why we don't use RICE as the acronym. We've moved that one away. We use police, protect, optimal load, early injuries, ice, compression, elevation still can exist, but we don't rest between runs. We use recovery techniques like the foam roller for muscle loosening and strength work to build up the key muscles to make the next run better. If you run, rest, run, rest, run, rest, you would always expect a problem would develop because the weaknesses are not being addressed. That's very important. So, if we talk about the ideal frequency of runs, which is a topic that a lot of people ask us, everyone is different. We know people that run once to twice a week. We might know people that run 5 to 6 or more times a week. We meet people that run 10 times a week, preparing for certain events where they want to keep the mileage high. We can't compare ourselves to each other. So Mo Farah possibly might run every day. Only he would need to know that. But I'm certain as a professional athlete, he would be doing a lot of strength work, a lot of active recovery, good sleep patterns, good nutrition patterns. These things help to have a different frequency of running. So it's really important you think about your own situation, your muscle strength, your injury history, your strength regime in 2020, which might look different to 2019, particularly if you went to a gym or a swimming pool or did strength work yourself. Is that the same? Your own sleep patterns is important. Your work, which has changed for so many people this year, does it allow you to run the same frequency as before? And I would suggest with most people it would not. It could be easier or harder to run the same frequency as before. And obviously family life and everything else that allows us to decide what frequency of running works best. And it's something we can always feed back to you about, what you say to us about what your normal and preferred frequency is. Very important to note the runners that more frequency does not always mean improved performance. In fact, with many runners we see that have poor strength, the reduced number of runs that they've traditionally done will improve performance because they can replace that 5th or 6th run with some strength work that builds up the muscles, prevents the injury, the tightness will there be far less, and therefore they can start to improve their performance. And this has been a good year for people to try and do a bit more strength work at home, particularly if they weren't going to a gym before, so that a lot of people are starting for the first time. So think about that factor. What is the ideal frequency for you for injury prevention and for improved performance? Now, the types of runs is important. The tempo run versus the interval run, interval sessions, versus the hill sessions, versus the long runs. That has to be considered. So if you break down the number of runs per week, and you might be a 4 run a week person, they don't need to be 4 of the same run. In fact, we would strongly advise against that. That's how a lot of overuse injuries are produced. The same route, the same speed, the same run with a weakness. Particularly if the weakness is in one side. Those 4 tempo runs will always end in an injury because the weakness is the same. Mix it up. Do your hill sessions, do your interval sessions, do your longer runs if you're trying to increase the miles and your body is at a point where it can do that, and then maybe the tempo run is a run of your weekly pattern rather than just I'm going out for a normal 3 to 5 mile run, which is my tempo run. And those people that do that have very good outcomes, particularly if they do strength work to enable them to do the different types of sessions at the different speeds that they want to. That's really important. Now we're going to go into some examples of the warm-ups and the exercises we've touched on, which is very important for today. If there's any questions, just pop them on now, and I'm just going to add them to the list there, the ones that we're going to be talking about. The first type of exercise in terms of dynamic warm-up, I'm just going to stand back here, and that's just to show you the lunge is a very good activity for strength work, but also in a warm-up. And a lot of you will be familiar with things like the alternating forward lunges, which is a very good exercise to do when you're on your way out for a run. Really important to get things moving. But don't forget you've got lots of different directions. If I stand side on, I can do my alternating forward lunge, but I can also do the reverse lunge alternating. I can then be facing you the camera and show you the side lunge, where I'm bending one knee as I go out to the side. So if I stand back, then a really good warm-up tactic is to do what I call the three-way lunge. Forward on the left, sideward on the left, and then reverse on the left. Now I'm going to go to the right. Forward on the right, sidewards on the right, and backwards on the right. Lots of muscle groups being warmed up at the same time. That's a good use of a warm-up exercise, but one that can also be used for strength. If we wanted to warm up the calves, we can walk on the toes, and then we would turn around and walk backwards. You can do some calf raises to get the calves moving. So the lunges and the calf raises, most of the muscle groups are being warmed up already. We then can bring in some angles, because of the fact we might be running off-road. Let's do the pigeon walk, just adding a little bit of rotation, and the next one, we might do the duck walk, where we're actually opening up the hips either way. And that allows a little bit of rotational warm-up to get things moving, particularly off-road. That's important. We might just get ready to be that running stride, where we might start and do some single leg hip flexions from side on, trying to lift with a little bit of power, 5 or 6 on each side to get the hip flexors warmed up. And then again in standing, we might do some hip openers, or some hip closing exercises, and these are all dynamic warm-up exercises. Our lower back and our mid-back, they're involved. So we can do some rotations. And then our arms are still involved in running. We might decide to warm them up forwards, big circles eventually, and then backwards the same way. And all these things can make up a rather quick but very effective warm-up that we would advise you to do, rather than just standing at the front door and doing a calf stretch that in effect would not prevent injury. And the research would prove that from studies they've done. The dynamic warm-up is the key. Get the heart rate starting to rise, and away you go after you've done that. Now we talk about the strength work. There's so many different aspects of strength work. I'm going to break it down, and then you can certainly add any questions after I've shown you. I've started with the lunges, but I'm going to just add something, and that is the proprioception. I'm going to use the Bosu ball, which is basically a half disc. You would use cushions at home if you haven't got a Bosu ball. If I place this here, I can carefully do my lunge onto the Bosu. I'm going to alternate legs. You would use a cushion at home. I can do that from this direction. If I wanted to go sideways direction, a little bit harder. I've got to just watch myself. I'm building up lots of muscle groups at once, core, glute strength, lots of different muscles that I need. That uneven surface is a very big way to make the off-road winter running much neater. And that's important, just adding that cushion for things like lunges, same as calf raises. I can stand on the Bosu ball, and I'll just do double legs, so I'm facing the camera, up and down, on the toes, from a cushion, single leg or double leg. You're building up strength and proprioception, your body's ability to prevent injury using that wobbly surface in winter is priceless, because out there at night time with the head torch, you need these muscles to work. That's really important. You want to do a lot of single leg stuff, and it doesn't have to be done on the Bosu. So we do a lot of single leg squats in our program. So I'll go from side on, obviously. You can see one leg out in front, and you're just building up the single leg squat strength. Very important to have that. The single leg deadlift, if we're looking more hamstring, we're going to just go down in that position. Get the hamstrings working and the glutes. Don't let that foot touch the ground. building up that strength, because I want those muscles to be working nicely when I'm working off-road in the winter. We do a lot of core work now, as many of you know. It can be using the floor, it can be using a settee, it can be using a Swiss ball. I'm going to use the Swiss ball here just to show you the type of exercise you can do. If I go back, we might start with a basic plank, and that's something you would do as part of a strength program. But because we're runners, we would take a running motion. Mountain climber. That can be done with the forearms on the ball. We want to take it a bit further. We'll put the hands on the ball, and we're going to get our running form sorted with good core hip strength relationship there. Lots of mountain climbers will improve your stability and your strength, particularly when you need to have that power going up the hill there. If you're looking for Swiss ball stability stuff, which again you can use the chair for with bridges, particularly if you have hamstring problems, lifting up the bottom up and down. We can then take that into a hamstring curl in that bridge position, single leg strength, particularly for the runners that have weakness on one side. Keep one leg in the air, up and down, and then take it a little bit further, single leg bridge curls. And you can do single leg bridges off the chair as well. All examples of strength work. If we talk about the proprioception, which we touched on just a little while ago, if we gave us a bit more space, a couple of exercises we tend to use for strength and proprioception, the speed skaters. Over, over. Try and lean forwards. Make yourself work for that landing. Land for a second. And if you do this exercise regularly, 2 to 3 times a week, speed skaters are very good at winter. Ankle stability, proprioception, strength. The knees, the control of the knees will help you running, and lots of glute, lots of core. Very, very important. So speed skaters, very important for that kind of stability work, will help particularly this time of year. The next one that I would always do as part of that would be things like side-to-side hopping. Taking your time, getting that control, seeing if there's a difference between left and right. Those people that take it a bit further might go into the zigzag and then compare to the other leg. So you build up from things like the lunges, the squats, the single leg deadlifts that we showed you, through the core exercise of the mountain climbers, the planks, the bridges, and then into the proprioception, more dynamic exercises that many of you may have done as part of a class or say a HIIT circuit, but we use them as running exercises. Therefore, they don't need to be done quickly. In fact, being done slower and with more caution and care is the best way to build that up. Now, just so I get my breath back, I'm just going to have a quick check, see if we can add any of the questions, the things we haven't already answered. I'll just go to Simon's question first, which was really good the other day, Simon, when you messaged. The effect of the cold on the muscles and the joints in itself is a question. And this is one of those ones that's interesting because you have to get the balance right. Obviously, you need to be warm enough, but not too warm. The effect of the cold on the joints, we can safely say, I guess the research has shown, a lot of that is the old wives' tale. That just because the cold is there doesn't mean anything is happening inside the joint, that I think historically people think. I'm always worse with my knees in the cold, thinking that something's happening in the joint, but the muscles around it may be different. You know, are they tighter? Have you done less activity over the course of that day leading up to whatever run or cycle, whatever you're doing? So you have to be very careful with the effect of the cold. You might have to work that little bit harder to get the muscles warmed up, which might make you think your joints are feeling warmer and therefore better. So does the cold have a direct effect on the joint behavior at the time of a runner? I would say, let's be careful saying that. I wouldn't say that. But the way we use our muscles at that time may be different in the middle of a 20-degree day in July to a 5-degree night in December. Solution, you make sure you do your dynamic warm-up better. You make sure you do your strength work when you're not walking or cycling or running better, so you know you can get going with the power you need. So the effect of the cold is very important. In terms of wrapping up, that's the next question. Some people then prefer to wear shorts all year round. Some people in winter have to be wrapped up a lot. it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to find what layers you feel comfortable in, whether it be leggings or such like, and then you'll know through that dynamic warm-up how you're feeling. You shouldn't obviously be too cold, and at the same time, things like the extremities, the fingers, the toes, the gloves, the socks must be prioritized, because the last thing you want is to have the extremities so cold that you're actually not moving the way you need to. So I would say go for more on the extremities from personal experience and knowing others that also like to do that. But at the same time, in terms of putting on too many layers, you'll know once you've done a few runs in the cold what's ideal for you. And obviously you want to err on the side of caution, have that extra layer with you that you can take off. But there's certainly not an ideal number. Obviously make sure you're not wearing too little number of layers based on what you run in the summer, because of course that's a much worse outcome. So I hope that explains that one, Simon. Go with what works for you for the layers when you're running, but be very careful that you make sure you get warmed up with that dynamic warm-up. It'll make such a difference. Now, any questions there? Just pop them on there. I think we've covered most of the questions in that one there. We've got about 5 minutes or so, because we're hoping to cover everything in the 30 minutes that we had. I might touch on one that someone did ask the other day, with the benefits of the off-road. And this is really important, because off-road runners often, by doing the off-road, become better road runners. And it's more muscle groups involved, more decisions being made. You have to factor that with the risk of the injuries of running off-road when you're not an off-road runner, and that might then bring in injury history. So if you've had previous knee, ankle, ligament type injuries, you need to build up your strength to justify the types of terrain you want to be on. But if you can achieve that, or if you haven't got any history that would sort of have you worried about that aspect, the changing of direction, the use of more muscle fibers, of more muscles in both legs, will often build strength. Therefore, when you run on the road and more predictable surfaces, you become a much more powerful runner. And that's important. If you only ever run on the roads, it's something worth exploring, but do get the strength work rather than just going straight to off-road from only ever running on the roads, because your muscles won't really understand what's going on. It would be very much a change in sport from a cyclist going to do swimming. You need to build up those muscles carefully. But off-road normally is a very good thing to do. Just be very careful at this time of year, obviously with the slippiness and things like that. The hills, similar thing. Hill training does help. It's always been done. You have to be very careful with the speeds, the distances, the number of intervals, and that will be to the individual. You wouldn't be doing hill interval sessions every run, because it would be very tricky to recover from that, but you would make sure there's one session a week at least where you know you're targeting those hills. And it might be a very simple approach. You might run up for 30 seconds and then walk down and recover for a minute or a minute and a half and do the same again. And that's a good way to approach hill intervals, and you're looking for consistency. If you're going to do 5 or 6 of those hill intervals, you want to be at that same place if you're doing it by time. So therefore you have to be cautious on the first couple, or you might go for a particular distance and you know what time you're trying to aim every repetition. And again, it should be reproducible. That's really important. Hill intervals of the winter, I love the best. If you've got the head torch, and I love a couple of hills we have near here, trail type hills, with the right light, very safe, and I find a very rewarding way to build up the key muscle strength in the winter. Obviously gets the heart rate up, which helps solve some of the problems around being cold, and therefore the hill interval session for me in the winter nights is a very powerful way to help your running, and you'll appreciate that on the longer runs when you feel a little bit more powerful there. Right, now I've got another couple of minutes. I'm just going to quickly float down and see if there's any other questions I've missed there. And it can be on anything related to winter running injuries. Some of the questions that people asked about the injury management, I would say if you do look at the accelerated recovery that we did the other week, that would probably answer a few of the questions that are just coming through. What do you do when you get a new injury, particularly this time of year? You want to make sure you look at accelerated recovery. So you ice early. You make the decision, will this need an x-ray or a hospital visit, to decide on an x-ray or not. We don't tend to rest. We make a decision and then we get it treated straight away using the foam roller, using early strength work, and then not being that awkward situation that 3 or 4 weeks into a winter injury that nothing has really changed. And that's really important at this time of year. There's always something that can be done, and therefore if it's not an x-ray situation, you start your recovery and rehabilitation straight away. And that's really important at this time of year. Now, a couple of you asked about the foam roller. How do you learn to use it? We do the foam roller classes, like all of our classes, on video link. It's about 40 classes a week we do. The timetable's on the Platinum page. The foam roller class you just do once, and we go head to toe, about 20-21 muscles in the body, from the neck all the way down to the lower calf, to teach you how to use it properly. And remember, it's not about duration and distance. The people that foam roll the best go straight for the knots, tidy it up in a short duration, and move on to the next one. And that's what we teach people in the class, what positions you get to for each particular muscle. So if you want to ask about the foam roller education class, just contact us, and that's at a day and a time to match your availability, and you just do that once. For the strength programs that a few people have asked about, again, the timetable and some examples of them are on the Facebook page. Contact us for a trial. They run 7 days a week. The runners generally do either the Sports Fit program, using exercises like what I showed you before, or the Swiss ball for core strength, which includes a lot of running exercises. Same thing, contact us for a trial, all done by video link, and hopefully you can sort of see the benefits of how that strength work will help the running there. Now, another minute or so, I'm just going to double check. We've got one more question coming through there. Yeah, support strapping for ankles in winter. It does come down to injury history. If you've had previous ankle history, that would be important. We, these days, don't tend to strap things like ankles as often, or even with the Velcro support braces, depending on the history, because the strength work is vital. Therefore, if you've always relied on an ankle support, it's a little bit tricky, particularly winter. So it really depends on how much strength work you're doing, but many people that probably in hindsight wean off the ankle support with strength work probably never needed to go in the first place, but at the time when they weren't doing strength work, that was their support. And that's really important. As some of you know, I don't have a cruciate ligament in my right knee. I've done cross country and Ironman distance triathlon type stuff for many, many years since that injury, and I have no problems. I don't wear a knee support because it wouldn't help. My muscle strength is perfect for my injury, and I never have any instability because it's the muscle strength that's controlling it. And knee support wouldn't help my sort of knee any more than what my muscles do, and my muscles do the job perfectly. So just be very cautious if you're putting a support on an ankle or a knee, just because possibly it could be detrimental, because long term your muscle strength stability might reduce, and therefore actually might be more reliant on it. Other people who have significant injuries that are very unstable would always benefit from support, particularly in the winter. So the answer would be probably more in winter, but not necessarily for everyone. Far less these days would need them than say 20 years ago. Excellent. So we've got another minute or so, and then we'll sign off. If there's any other topics that people want over the next couple of weeks in the lead up to Christmas, do let us know. We're looking to do a Facebook Live seminar every week or so, and the idea is it just gives you some answers to the questions that sort of pop up day to day. If you just see what people ask in the lead up to what's going to be a very strange festive season this year. We hope that everyone keeps their fitness levels up. Our class is going to be running all the way through. I think it's just going to be Christmas, Boxing and New Year's days where the video link classes probably won't be on, but it looks like all the other classes will be on throughout the duration. So have a great weekend. We look forward to any other questions people have. Message them to us, and then if you want to share this video to teach people about how to prevent winter running injuries, then feel free, and we'll see you next seminar. Thanks then.